let's hop straight into it. In this video, we talk about Ethereum, Solana, and Bitcoin. I've got a couple of proxy trades in eToro, SBET, and BMNR. In my non-eToro portfolios, I also hold Upexi, Galaxy, and DFDV as some Solana action. Should be good on those ones. We'll talk about any exciting news and stuff, and let's get cracking. Right, I've really enjoyed the weekend, so I haven't looked at the crypto charts over the weekend, despite the fact I was expecting a little bit more of a sell-off than we apparently got. So I'm pleasantly surprised on that behalf. So Ethereum currently sits at 4.5% of my eToro portfolio. I've got a cold storage bag on that as well, which I didn't talk about. But mainly on this one, I'm using BMNR and SBET as leverage plays on that. So BMNR, looking at my portfolio, blah, 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 is also 4.38, and SBET's a lot smaller because I'm not as confident on that one, but I think the smaller market cap should do well. SBET is around 1.84. So all in all, I do have quite a large exposure to Ethereum, and that should lead us to good things. My targets on Ethereum, I think 6,000 should be easy. 8,000 is certainly possible, especially with Tom Lee being all about it. But higher than that, I will not be in kind of Ethereum past this fib level at the latest, mainly because my conviction in it as an asset isn't as high. My conviction mainly comes from the changed narrative with Ethereum. The big institutions really love it. TradFi seems to be moving more to it than Solana, even though Solana is much better. I think they're lagging a little bit on that one, but I do think the ETFs on Solana are going to be whopper for that one. So looking at the chart, we have a nice volume shelf we're carving out here. Really, really good. Massive support is down at 2.5k. Don't think we're going to get there. My average sits higher at about 3k. Not adding to this. It is what it is. This latest pullback was a little bit shallower than I was anticipating, but it makes sense why it's kind of hanging there. I do like that, and I like this. If we can make a new high above this high, that will make me super happy. I'll start trimming at about 6,000, but I just want to reiterate, this is not a super high conviction core play for a longer term. This is a trade, a swing trade. I don't hold crypto in my eToro portfolio for the whole cycle. I mean, the cycle might be changing now, but I still think the alts will be more susceptible to the crypto winter than Bitcoin perhaps might. I think that one's going to be far less volatile than it has historically, which a lot of people will like. I actually hate it because the volatility in Bitcoin has enabled me to have massive jumps in growth through halving cycles. But it is what it is, and we must continue to change our trading plan and investment strategies as we grow. My portfolio is also a lot bigger, which makes how I build it a little bit different. I typically am a lot less riskier than I would have been when I first started. So indicators, RSI looks a little bit neutral, MACDX Plus looks good, and Flow looks good on the daily. Support to the downside again is going to be that recent low, and we've got a lot of volume shelf here. So if we do break below 3.6, I do want to say that there could be quite a sharp drop to the downside. We have a big volume gap here where I'm circling. That typically signals that people aren't interested in buying the asset in that area. The first time we get a little bit of volume comes in around about 3k. So the downside risk there is quite a sudden large one, but the upside, we're pretty much going to be going blue sky soon. So can't hate that. Quick look at weekly though. So I don't want to make this video too long. I don't want to get too lost in the technicals like a lot of people seem to do. On the weekly, from this low wick here, we did around about 250% at the highest. So can't really sniff at that in less than a month. But someone will always moan, it's crashing because we're down 5-6%. I don't think that's the case. This looks really bullish to me. On the monthly, we did make a new higher high, and I don't think that's going to change. We do have a lot of room for error on the downside with, it's going to be really hard to make a lower low. We're going to have to get back below 1.13. That said, on the weekly, what I don't like is the RSI is a little bit spicy, so some chop and some cool off could be expected on that one. The MACDX Plus looks pretty good though. Institutions still coming in, and Flow, it's high. It's kind of stalling a little bit. So again, the monthly is telling us a little bit of cool off could be coming. but there is a little bit of room for upside. If we look back here, RSI can get up to around 92. Currently, we're at 63. So a lot of people always point at the RSI being, once it gets to 80, I think that's the generic setting, or 70, whatever you've got it set to, when it gets to that level, that means it's got to cool off. That is not the case. Each asset treats its RSI differently. Some assets, as soon as they go over that line, they will prefer to have a strong pullback, but other assets that have big parabolic moves can push higher. If we look back through historically on Bitcoin, again, we had this massive parabolic move here, huge. So the RSI can get very stretched if we get parabola in this asset. Some assets don't like going parabolic, so they won't show that on the RSI. So you can kind of set your expectations as where the pullbacks are going to be. Again, if we do have a parabolic phase and it starts getting really hot up there in the RSI for Bitcoin, then it's probably good to like de-risk a little bit. So that's why I would use RSI in this one, and I'm going to give it a little bit more leeway. A pullback would be nice here to give us a nice, slow, steady uptrend. But if we have a parabolic phase, then that's what I'm looking for. Let's look at the next thing. Let's take a look at Solana then. This has had a really nice... So this is more what I prefer to see, the slow and steady grind upwards and right. It's a lot easier to predict where price is going to go because you've got a lot more levels to work with. Parabolic phases are just, you can throw a dart at a dartboard and hope it hits it somewhere. This is just my preference. I think this one's going to be a lot higher return for me, and it's a lot larger position. Solana is 11.54% of my portfolio, and I'm super happy with that. Don't want to add any more to it unless we have a substantial pullback. Price is struggling to make a higher high here. We did break down to the lower trend level, but I mean, we had 162, so it's growing a lot slower than Ethereum, but the narrative really did shift for Ethereum very suddenly and violently. Can't hate that. I think Ethereum's going to lead, and then Solana will after, unless the ETF comes before then. But measured moves we're working with on this one. If I can move the board down a little bit. Wait, being a jerk. So the first measured move we've got is kind of 340 and then 440. I do think those levels are really easy to hit, so that they're going to be my base case. We also have a measured move around 500 as well. So there's a lot of confluence here to get Solana higher, and looking at some of the ETF numbers, a couple of those come online, we can see a substantial jump in their already planned obligations to buy. But there is quite a lot of resistance here, so I wouldn't, without the ETFs, we're probably going to hit ahead on 260, and then the Fibonacci level at 277, and then the historical resistance at 300. That's also a psychological level. So there's a lot of stickiness in this area. So I do expect some chop before we get to those price targets, and there's a lot of Fibonacci levels there as well. So I think it's going to be harder to go like super parabolic. I think we're going to hit ahead and bounce around a lot on Solana, which is good for me because I can trade it a little bit more. I haven't traded yet because I want it to get to a minimum kind of level. I did trim way back here in January, but since then we had that big pullback and I added super aggressively on that one. We completed the measured moves we were handling back then. But really all we can really talk about elsewise on this one, we've got a lot of support to the downside. We've got huge volume at 177 and a massive at 145, and loads of confluence with Fibonacci levels. RSI is looking really good as well. MACDX Plus looks good, and flow is kind of flat. So again, I'm quite surprised there was no sell-off in crypto over the weekend. Typically, we have been seeing a lot of leveraged positions get wiped out with Binance moving money around and stuff to Wintermute, but we did have a massive wipeout of leverage not long ago, so perhaps people aren't really shorting it. So I haven't checked, but I'm pretty sure if I check, there will be a lot more leverage long positions, so we're likely to get a big move up and then a pullback at some point in most of this stuff. Let's take a quick look at the weekly though. This chart's going to look a little bit more chaotic because I have been looking at it a lot more. Oh, sorry, pressed the wrong button. Here we go. So mainly on here, on the weekly, looking at a massive cup and handle That would be super bullish. The bullish targets for that are a little bit insane, so I take that with a pinch of salt. But it does mean there will be a very explosive move out of it at some point, and that would happen at around 258, which would be a new high closure, I think, on this one. So I think when we get that, we will have quite a large move to the upside, and that's where a lot of my targets are sitting. So RSI on Solana looks pretty good. We've got plenty of room to the upside. MACDX Plus looks good. We did ping overbought a little bit, but doesn't look to be concerning. And flow still looks really good as well. So again, pretty much the same thing we're seeing in Ethereum. These guys, it's all rising tide lifts all boats, which the narratives are slightly different. The market caps are slightly different, so we do get the law of large numbers with the bigger boys. But again, Solana got a lot of catching up to do. But I am totally here for it. Right, moving on to the daddy, Bitcoin. Love it, love it, love it. We are coming off a very nice week indeed on this one. Let me measure this. Perfect ad on that one, by the way. 8 lots added. Love it. Well done, me. Always good to blow your own horn sometimes. That's up about 15% to the peak of that. We pulled back a little bit. We had that little wick there. That, going into the weekend, did make me think we're going to get more of a pullback. But again, it hasn't happened. And that makes me annoyed that I did a little trim, but a note on that trim. I did have some very small micro positions that were like 0.0 something % of my weighting. Had to trim them just because new copiers on eToro, to copy those teeny tiny positions, they'd have to use the minimum amount of around $2,000 to copy me. I'd really try to keep my minimum copy to around $500. Just so smaller accounts can copy me if they require or are interested. So that's what led to that housekeeping. I still have some small micro positions in a lot of my crypto stuff, but it's getting late in the cycle and I don't want to over trim too much because I want to make the gains on them. So I'm keeping an eye on that. I'm trimming them out as price moves up a little bit and rotating them on pullbacks into larger positions. So that's the plan with these 3 little lots that I've trimmed here. Haven't been able to trim them back because price hasn't pulled back, which is annoying, but not the end of the world. It was such a small amount. I think overall it was 0.07% or something of my portfolio. I mean, my available balance is less than 1%, and I already had around 1%, so it was very, very negligible. So pull back to the downside, massive support going to be at that volume shelf at 117. That would be very nice to get a little pullback there, but we do kind of have confluence. Below that, we've got that red trend line, and then below that, we've got the orange Fibonacci level. So overall, there's a lot of support forming underneath now. We've broken out of this trend. However, this breakout, we do have legs to get to kind of 131. That would be, if we're not going to pull back, can we at least get that so we can have a little bit of a peak above the RSI? That'd be really nice. But other than that, the main thing I wanted to talk about was back in April. So I started on the 26th of April. I plotted this line where I thought crypto was going to go. And this is a classic example of the further the time, as more time passes, it gets really hard to predict exactly where price is going to be. Things change in the market, new levels get carved out that are interesting. You can see initially it tracked very well up until kind of June, and then we started to separate. Interestingly enough, with the same amount of size that I initially predicted, just in the wrong direction, which happens quite a lot. But that doesn't mean it's bad to try and guess where things. It's good to try and think how things are going to move, because it helps you understand how a particular asset is going to react at certain levels. Obviously, if in July I re-looked at this and thought I'm going to put new levels on it, maybe I wouldn't have changed too much because it attracts so well initially and that key level had held before. But I mean, if I'd come to August and I was going to predict where price was going to go, I probably wouldn't have gone with another move higher. It's a mental game. Trading and investing is much more about understanding how you perceive things than it is about how things actually move, if that kind of makes sense. So you've almost got to train your brain to expect certain things I think some crypto bulls, maybe if they drew this, they probably just draw a line, 45 degrees to the right, straight up, maybe even sharper. That's not how things move. I would have traded this on eToro, but the fee structure they had back then was not great. They have changed that since, so it is easier to trade crypto. You don't get hit with so many fees. But for me, it's too late in the cycle now. I don't want to be faffing around coming in and out. I think we've got 1 quarter left before we have the final phase. Perhaps we don't get such a big pullback in Bitcoin, but I still think maybe we get 20-30% drawdown at least for crypto winter. But the other assets I will plan to be all out of. And I will mostly be out of Bitcoin as well. I don't want to hold too much of it. It's not my forte. It's not my bread and butter. I use crypto during its bullish phases to really leverage myself up, using proxy trades especially, because they tend to have a higher return. But typically, I don't want to be in them going forward as well. With the way the macro is and, the fourth turning, I think we're going to see assets inflate quite quickly as global printers start going and there's a little bit of competition with fiat. That said, Bitcoin will benefit a lot from that as well. But I have a large allotment of that in cold storage. So I don't need to hold that in eToro. eToro is more for trading crypto. Hopefully that makes sense. Back to the charts though, I've got on a little bit of a tangent to the upside. We've got a lot of confluence pattern-wise at 146. My base case now is a lot lower. The volatility in crypto that I was expecting just hasn't been there. So my base case is around about 150. My parabolic area for the move up is going to be between 177 and 200. Initially, I was looking at over 200. I don't think that's going to happen with how Bitcoin is behaving. The pumps up and the pullbacks down are not as exaggerated as they traditionally were. Now, that could be large numbers kicking in, and that can also be TradFi starting to calm the price down again. I think we're getting some volatility from the smaller brokers that aren't as regulated, like Binance and that stuff. But at some point, they're also going to be regulated, so I think the volatility is going to get even lower. We're going to be more slow, and so we're going to trade more like this SPY or gold. So that's something to bear in mind going forward. So I think the cowboy days are coming to an end, which makes me a little bit sad. But there's still plenty of ways to make money in the market. I do want to stress that if you've always made money in crypto, the returns might be significantly lower than they historically have been going forward. So it might be time to start putting some more strings on your bow and take advantage of other pockets. We know what's happening around the world. We know energy is going to be banger. Healthcare and stuff should be a good staple going forward. Tech, I think, has had quite a lot of red, and that's probably going to cool off a little bit. Financials, they've got a lot of tailwinds coming. You just got to think outside the box, genomics and stuff like that. Where's the future going? If AI is going to be so good, what sectors is that going to impact that people aren't really looking at right now? So I've gone off on a tangent, haven't I? I've got distracted. I was talking about crypto and I've gone off on genomics. Let's have a quick look at the weekly, getting back to that. Sorry, it's been a while. I'm trying to catch up with everything as well. Weekly, really hard on this chart now to see what is happening on the weekly because I've put so much on it. But that inverse head and shoulders, the pattern on that. Did I even draw that on there? Let me have a quick look. Probably somewhere, but that's kind of where your head and shoulders get you to 155. So again, confluence. So we're definitely looking between 150 and 200. I know it's a big area. It's always going to be a big area. It's very hard to know where the big boys are going to let this one run to. So it's more watching the price action, how it handles every day, especially during Q4. This is where it's going to happen. This is the magic. RSI in the weekly, it's hot, but not overly so. Got a little bit of bearish diversions coming. So, but that could invalidate if we ever move up. MACD Plus looks good, and flow is kind of, it's been flat for a while. We need to see some oomph here. So all in all, the charts don't look that dissimilar in terms of, are we going to pump or are we going to drop? Like I said, a rising tide lifts all boats. That said, I don't think a lot of the smaller crap coins are really going to do well on this one. If your crap coin is not near making new highs right now, it's probably not going to make new highs. Might make some good moves, but it's certainly on the riskier side of crypto plays. Right now is the time to be backing the big boys and the ones that have done well so far. Hopefully I answered a bunch of questions and I didn't distract you too much with some of the things I got distracted by myself. Hit me up with some questions if you've got anything. That's a wrap. If you enjoyed this content, feel free to share it with your mum, your nan, your dad, your dog, whoever. And I'll see you next time.